In the last lesson, we talked about how crucial the Declaration of Independence was. I suppose you remember what this Declaration of Independence was. By the virtue of this declaration, the 13 rebelling colonies declared themselves as independent states. But this did not mean an end to the American War of Independence. But why is it so? This is because while the American colonists, these revolutionaries, declared independence on their end, this did not bring an end to the war. They had to do something so that the British did not win, so that the British did not get an upper hand in the war. The British were initially mounting some victories on the colonists. Why is it so? Because they had very regimented troops, and their troops were also outnumbering the colonists, the revolutionaries. But thanks to the able leadership of George Washington and the way he was able to organize the Continental Army, because of which the Continental Army could also fight back the British power. George Washington knew that he had to do something so that they did not lose the war. What did he do? Washington managed to force the British to evacuate Boston. He compelled the British army to move away from Boston. Through this, the colonists or the erstwhile colonists could lay siege on the city of Boston. But what happened after this? Washington knew that along with laying siege on the city of Boston, he had to pull some sort of a surprise attack on the British. Why was it so? Because initially the British army could mount momentous victories on the revolutionaries in New York. It is then that George Washington crossed a frozen Delaware to take the British army by surprise. What happened after that? After that, Washington, through this surprise attack, took over a major part of New Jersey. This was huge. The British army already had to evacuate Boston, and now under the leadership of George Washington, the Americans also managed to take over the city of New Jersey. After Washington and the Continental Army managed to take over New Jersey, fortune was also on their side. Why was it so? Because in the Battle of Saratoga, the Americans also emerged victorious. This was a huge thing because they were much lesser in number compared to the British troops. So despite being outnumbered by the British troops, Americans won this Battle of Saratoga. This was huge. Through these incidents, power was slowly slipping out of the hands of the British colonial rule, and the American revolutionaries were slowly gaining victory. But the events we have been discussing all this while took a very different shape when this war reached an international dimension. How did that happen? How were other countries also involved in this war? The Congress was very right to assume that Britain had far more enemies in Europe than allies. It is then that the Congress signed a lot of important and very crucial deals and agreements with powers that were rival to the British army. So between the years 1778 and 1781, the American revolutionaries were supported by various European powers. These European powers, as I just mentioned, were rivals of the British colonial rule. Now, who were those European powers? Major powers among these were France and Spain. So France and Spain joined hands with the American revolutionaries in their fight against British colonial rule. Along with them, Netherlands had also joined the revolutionaries. France played a major role that led to the victory of the colonists. Why was it so? Because France sent huge resources to the colonists in their war against British power. Along with sending lots of resources, France also sent a lot of its elite troops and even trained many people in the American regiment. In this way was formed a very unique and effective French-American coalition that managed to successfully send the British away from America. It was with the siege of Yorktown that the revolution came to a close. Yorktown was a major port city in the colony of Virginia where Britain had sent a lot of troops to defeat the Continental Army. George Washington knew that he had to pull off some sort of a surprise attack. What did he do? He tried to cut off all supplies to the British Army. What did the British Army do? It was expecting new troops and ammunitions to reach it from New York. But the British ships never made it to Yorktown. Why? Because the French army had already defeated all the British ships. France had joined the revolutionaries in the siege of Yorktown. What happened after this? The British were left at a dead end without any supplies. It was also outnumbered against the American-French coalition. They had to surrender Yorktown. The British army was defeated. They had to give up their colonial possessions. This was the final defeat for the British army. On the October of 1781, the British army finally left North America. We just discussed that the British General Lord Cornwallis accepted the defeat of Britain on the October of 1781. So this finally marked an end of the American War of Independence. Now any conclusion to a war is logically followed by peace treaties. Since Britain lost this war, it was compelled to sign peace treaties. But with whom did it sign peace treaties? And what were these treaties? Britain signed peace treaties with not just the American colonists, but also with rival European powers. Who were those European powers? France and Spain. We have previously discussed how France and Spain, even with Netherlands, had joined hands with the colonists to wage this war against the British colonial rule. But the treaties that Britain signed with these rival European powers, that is France and Spain, these were mostly about political arrangements, and these treaties are not of great importance to us. Instead, we will be talking about the peace treaty that Britain signed with the American colonists. With the American colonists, Britain signed the Treaty of Paris with all the representatives of the 13 independent colonies on September 3, 1783. This Treaty of Paris finally marked the end of the American War of Independence. Now, if I quickly ask you this question, when was the Treaty of Paris signed, will you be able to answer? Was it in 1780, 1781, 1782 or 1783? Yes, you are right. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. Now, what did this Treaty of Paris state? What was this treaty intended to do? With this Treaty of Paris, Britain recognized the independence of the 13 rebellious colonies. The former colonies that were under British colonial rule now became the 13 independent states that comprised the nation, that is the United States of America. So you can consider this Treaty of Paris as the fountainhead, as the moment of birth of the nation, the United States of America. Now, Now what happened immediately after this treaty was signed? After this treaty was signed, came into existence this new nation that was the United States of America. But whenever any nation is formed, there are a lot of things to do. Its governments have to be structured, its policies have to be stated, many things need to be done to give any nation a formal shape. So what followed the Treaty of Paris? After the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, USA formed a national government in 1789. And who was the president of this newly formed state? Yes, George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. This George Washington, who was the leader of the Continental Army and gave birth in the minds of the colonized people the hope of attaining independence from British colonial rule. Now what shape did the new government take in this newly formed nation? The government that was formed in the United States of America was very different from what was in existence at Britain. This is why the people decided that they wanted to have a democratic nation, a liberal nation, where ultimate power would lie at the disposal of the citizens. So America came into existence as a liberal and democratic nation, and it also had a republican constitution. We just talked about how the United States of America came into existence as an independent nation. It also had a republican constitution. Together with this republican constitution was added the Bill of Rights. This Bill of Rights assured the citizens of America many kinds of freedoms and liberties. Freedoms and liberties in the likes of justice under the law, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom of press. Along with this, the Bill of Liberties also promised a lot of civil liberties. So with this, we come to an end to the discussion on the American War of Independence. We understood what was the background of the war, how the colonies were established by Britain and other foreign powers in America, how the colonized people rose in rebellion against the foreign rule, against various sort of arbitrary taxes and impositions on them. In this lesson, we could also mark and understand the trajectory that this war took, the various incidents that comprised the American War of Independence, the Declaration of Independence as it were, and what happened after the Declaration of Independence, how America came into being as an independent, liberal, democratic nation, how a formal constitution, a republican constitution, was also adopted. This was the first major political revolution against a foreign power, and you could understand how the spirit of nationalism played a major role in giving shape to this revolution. It is for this reason that the American War of Independence inspired subsequent revolutions across the world, and it is one such revolution that we will be discussing in the next lessons, that is the French Revolution. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.